Okay, let's start. Low attendance, not good. This is the most important part of the course. I mean, this is really what you'd like to take with you going forward. I guess a lot of you are counting on the video quality. The videos are not, I'm not as good as I was back in the day, so you might consider coming to class, and especially to Leopold's class, which is now coming back. Leopold is healthy again. I have a couple of announcements. The first one is, new important topic. Obviously, that's the first announcement. And the second one is the German Association of Economists, the German Economic Association, or German-speaking, because it includes Switzerland and Austria, is looking for someone to work in Berlin as a studentische Hilfskraft, and it's decent pay. It's not like working for the Messe Berlin, but it's pretty steady work, and it's very interesting. You meet some very intriguing economist types, if that's not an oxymoron. And you'll be sitting at the DIW. It's about 10 hours a week on average. So if you're interested, I'll leave this embedded in the slide deck so you can look at it later. Okay, so it's you have to have a bachelor's degree. That's obviously for us no problem. And it'd be nice to have some experience, but you guys have the market now. It's a seller's market for laborers, so you can, even if you don't have any experience, and you're interested, I would apply, because it's there's a shortage of manpower in Germany. If you read the newspaper, you know that. Okay, so it's please send your email to Frau Norman, Caroline Norman, at that address. Okay, if you're interested, but maybe you don't need that right now. Okay, today we're going to talk about new Keynesian economics. 3 lectures left in the class. So the question is, why do we not use the RBC model? I told you last time it doesn't work so well. It's not perfect, even though we have a feeling that consumers smooth consumption and workers respond to wages, and sometimes they respond to the extensive margin. There seems to be something moving the variables in the right direction. Investment moves a lot more than consumption, percentage or otherwise. It seems to be on the right track, but there are a lot of things that are missing. One is money. Right? We have a feeling that money supply, monetary policy, interest rate policy, as we understand it today, is important. And it's not in this model because there's no central bank in this model. Okay, there is an interest rate. There was a rate of return on capital, net rate of return after depreciation, but it's divorced from the monetary sector. And the question is, how can we bring those two back together? And that's the objective of modern macroeconomics, is try to bring the monetary sector into the field, into the playing field, and see what happens. Okay, so I'll start by reviewing last time. We'll talk about long-run neutrality as an anchor. I spoke about anchors a lot in this course. So long-run neutrality of money is it's almost like belief. We have very strong priors, and I showed you the data on which country? What's the famous example of monetary neutrality in my class? It's Turkey, your country. Turkey is convincing evidence for me. I mean, Turkey sealed the deal for me. Go back and look at that slide. 1960 to 2020, the price level in Turkey rose by several million %, and the money supply rose by several million %. And if you do the Cambridge equation, you get a change in velocity of almost 0. So all the increase in the real money demand and supply in Turkey is matched by an increase in real GDP. Turkey grew a lot between 1960 and 2019. So the long-run monetary neutrality must be part of our mindset. It must be part of our DNA. And the question is, how do we get to that? Sometimes it takes a while, right? And that's kind of what I'm going to try to get at, why the cutting-edge models of macro are talking about how to make short-run monetary policy matter. In the long run, it doesn't matter. Okay? It's a really important idea. And I'm going to talk about why in modern macro monetary neutrality fails in the short run. And that's something you should all understand, not just for the exam, but for your life. It's really important. And if you learn anything in macroeconomics, why do we have this tension between the short run and the long run? There are many different ways to do this, and if you're interested, there's a reference there you can look at, but I'm going to try to give you this overview today. An overview, I'm going to give you a few diagrams, a few pictures, some inspiration, and then later we'll, if you like, you can take advanced monetary with Professor Weinke, or you can go somewhere else in Berlin and take a more advanced monetary course and understand this in more detail. There are two basic things I'm going to talk about today. One is changing prices could be a problem because it's costly to do so from the perspective of the firm. And the second idea is that firms may not want to set their prices every day, or they may not be able to set their prices every day. Okay, so those are two approaches to understand why prices are sticky. Okay, and this is something you should remember, and we'll try to I'll give you a really simple way of understanding it today, and then next week we'll do a bit more complicated material to back it up. Last time we did some difficult stuff, the RBC model. You should really spend some time looking at that. Watch the video, which will go online today. We talked about solution methods of these models. They have rational expectations. They're forward-looking, so you can't just choose any old value. To make this model solve, you have to choose the right value. And in this class of models, there's exactly one level of consumption that brings us back to the steady state, given the shock. Okay, and we keep getting shocked and again, so this is a fairly powerful idea. The notion of saddle stability applied to the case of stochastically disturbed models was kind of a revolution. And we talked about ways of solving that model, and I talked about the method of undetermined coefficients. That's the standard way that we do this. The model is linearized. We know the solution is linear, and then we solve for it, given that we don't know it. And that can be applied at a very basic level or at a very complicated level using matrix algebra. It's a common idea. Okay? And then we criticize the RBC model. Criticize it for a lot of good reasons. So it was a revolution in the 1980s, but the fire went out after a while. The ideas went forward. We still use them. We stand on the back of Prescott and Kydland and King and Plosser. Some of these guys are still alive. You don't want to stand on them in a painful way, but in any case, we found that the model doesn't always get it right. Okay, and you should remember why that's the case. And we call that the legacy. The reason why we're still talking about it is not because I like to talk about old dead people, but rather these methods are useful. We're still using them today. Okay, so remember that. Just to remind you, anyway, the critiques, weak propagation of shocks. Kind of, the story is cooked. The story is cooked to make it all depend on technical change and its dynamics, which is already kind of hardwired in the first place. So it's kind of cheating in a sense. The model has the property that the business cycle is an optimal response to the environment that agents face. And we have a feeling maybe the government is in the game because there's something the government can do better, maybe smooth things out. Policy, the pandemic, think about the pandemic, a great example. Maybe the government can improve on matters. So that's a reason to criticize the model. The model would not allow these types of interventions. Unemployment in this model doesn't exist. It's voluntary, which is kind of a pain, right? It's not very pleasant. For a lot of people, if you talk to them who are unemployed, they're not exactly saying, well, this is a great time to take a break. I'm taking a break now, right? It's a bit more complicated than that. There's an involuntary component of unemployment, even though you might think, well, I know some guys who are kind of gaming the system and living off their parents and whatever. That tends to be the exception rather than the rule. Okay? The question that I'm going to talk about today is why do we care about money if the world is a big real business cycle? We shouldn't care about the central bank. The central bank is irrelevant. I mean, I think Karl Marx actually has a sentence in Das Kapital where he says, money and financial matters is just a sideshow. Well, I don't ascribe to that view. I think money and financial matters are important, and this financial crisis was good proof of that. Okay? So we need to have a view of why money matters in the most fundamental way. Okay, so that's why we have the new Keynesian approach. The last 3 lectures of this course will be about the new Keynesian approach. And what does that mean? The most important thing is that there's market imperfections. We don't have perfect competition in the product markets, in the labor markets. And we can observe it. We observe firms setting prices. In the classic perfect competition world, every firm is a price taker, right? They just stand there and say, oh, that's the price, I'll produce this much. Oh, that's the price went up, I'll produce a little bit more. Price went down. That's not the way the world really works, and that twist of reality actually matters in a big way. Because if a firm can set the price, then it can observe other firms setting the prices, and maybe these things have aggregate effects. And maybe if all firms hold back and don't change their prices, that means the whole price level won't change. Strategic complementarity. That's an old idea which is still alive and kicking. If you have market imperfection, then you can talk literally about firms setting prices. Now, a lot of people who are market fanatics don't like that. They don't like talking about imperfect competition because it means scratching the model of the market. And I think a realistic, honest economist would say that markets are not always perfect. Maybe we need to do the right interventions to make them work better. And if Amazon sets the prices for millions of products and everybody else kind of follows, that's not the perfect competition paradigm. So that could be some secret making the Keynesian approach relevant. Because as soon as you allow a firm to set the price, you're departing from the perfect competition that we had last week in the real business cycle model. Okay? This means that, of course, the government can intervene. Maybe the government can improve matters. Fiscal policy might matter. Monetary policy certainly matters. So suddenly, like the scales fall off your eyes and you see stuff that you've never seen before. Okay? Unemployment can be involuntary as well as voluntary. Okay, so the failure of the market to clear can be reflected in unemployment. This is an old Keynesian idea which is still hanging around. And then most importantly today, money matters. So remember, money is the stuff that greases the wheels. In the long run, it doesn't matter, but in the short run, it seems to. So that's where I want to go today. The fundamental idea is that for some reason, monetary policy matters in the short run. If the ECB raises interest rates tomorrow and didn't announce it, that would cause a lot of real effects. And even if they announced it, it might cause real effects in the short run. But in the long run, no. Okay, so that's the tension we're going to try to deal with. Okay, so who remembers this dude? Remember, this is on TV now. You're going to be on YouTube for the rest of your lives. and this video is popular. This one will sell. Who is this guy? Say it? Yeah. What was his first name? Oh, for extra credit, you already got 10 points for me. David Hume, okay? Scottish philosopher. Preceded Adam Smith. He was a teacher of Adam Smith, right? So look at the kind of clothes these guys used to wear back then. Imagine how, I guess in the winter it's probably not so bad, but in the summer, not so sure. Hume said in 1752, he said, there's no reason to think that the quantity of money, even if it's gold, because for Hume it was gold, should matter. It should not make a country richer or poor, because you can't eat the gold. I mean, you can't even wear it much. It's pretty heavy. It's just the grease that oils the mechanism of commerce. It is not the subject of commerce. Okay, so we use the means of payment. So that's the fundamental premise that drives monetary neutrality at the 50 or 60 year horizon, is that basically it's oil. It doesn't make you richer. It helps you do the trading that makes you richer. Okay? So he said this a long time ago, and this inspired Robert Lucas, actually, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech to mention that, and many of his other essays. I mean, we've kind of rediscovered David Hume in the past 100 years. And again, this is a paper, this is literally a paper, it's not even a book, it's an essay. So he was able to inspire monetary economics for hundreds of years just by maybe 6 pages of text. If you have a chance, look at it. It's really amazing. Very smart. But he didn't stop there. He also said, he kind of anticipated Jevons. He said it's really a unit of account. We could switch from Arabic back to Roman numerals again and do all the math. And it wouldn't change anything. It would just change the procedures that we use to add and subtract and multiply. We could use some other base 16 numbers to do the accounts. It wouldn't change anything. It's just a unit of account. Okay, it's obvious, right? But Hume was also had an opinion on why money seemed to matter. So Hume was amazingly self-critical. He said, why is it the case that when money comes into a place, and he was thinking about Spain, the big rivals of the United Kingdom back then. Spain, why? Spain was colonizing South America, stealing the gold, and bringing it to Spain. And he was thinking, well, what are the effects of that on Spanish welfare? Is Spain going to be a richer country, or is it going to be, the same? He said, he noticed that when the money arrives, things start to happen. Things start to happen. So I'll read it. It is first dispersed into many, not dispersed into many hands, but confined to the coffers of a few persons. So the safes and the chests of a few persons who seek to employ it to their advantage. A set of manufacturers or merchants, we shall suppose, who have received returns of gold and silver for goods they have sent to Cadiz. Cadiz was the port city in Spain where all the commerce from South America was coming. They are enabled to employ more workmen than formerly who never dreamed of demanding higher wages, but are glad of employment from such good paymasters. So the money's there, whatever that money is, that gold, right? Then he writes, the artisan carries his money to the market where he finds everything at the same price as formerly, but returns with greater quantity and better kinds for use of his family. So that injection of money seemed to have some effect because people are feeling good, they're working harder, they're getting more goods, and goods what make them happy. Farmer and the gardener, finding that their commodities are taken off, apply themselves with alacrity to raising more. So they work harder to replace the inventories that have been depleted. It is easy to trace the money and its progress through the whole Commonwealth, where we shall find that it must first quicken the diligence of every individual before it increases the price of labor. Wages don't respond. So basically, this is the new Keynesian model in a nutshell. For some reason, the prices don't react. People think they're richer, work harder, produce more, the economy expands, we have a boom. This is what happened in Cadiz after the gold came in. So there are many mechanisms that Hume was talking about. And I urge you to read. There's some even better parts of that essay that I won't going to force you to read. But the basic logic is the same. Nominal prices are predetermined. So they're a little bit like the capital stock of the RBC model. They're predetermined. You can't change it right now. Even if you can set your own price, you're not going to change the price level. So it looks like to your advantage, maybe when you can, to do something about it, but the whole price level is not going to react at once. Not in this world. So, and change in interest rates, change in money supply, all the things we call money could have a real effect. The real supply of money changes. So if the price level is a state variable, you increase the nominal money supply, you increase the real amount of credit, or you reduce the interest rate, that has a real effect immediately. Okay, it's because the price level is kind of has this variable, the state variable quality. And yet, in the long run, the price level catches up. So that's the mystery that we're going to try to solve today. So a good model should have non-neutrality in the short run. The propagation should be there. So think about Slutsky. The model should continue to adjust. And in the long run, the central bank or the controller of, because Hume didn't have a central bank. The Scots eventually made one of their private banks into a central bank, or the Bank of England. This came later. But back then it was gold, right? It was all about gold and claims on gold. Now, in the long run, the central bank today, the Bank of China, the Bank of Iceland, the European Central Bank, the Fed, they control the inflation rate because they have a target rate of inflation that they set, and they'll do whatever it takes to get that target inflation. You could also say they set the money growth rate in the long run, but they don't do that technically. They set the interest rate, but in the long run it has the same effect, right? That's what we learned when we talked about the Sadrowski model. So here's something to entertain you. Robert Lucas, going back and thinking about Hume, it is clear from these data that the applicability of quantity theory with remarkable success applies to co-movements in money and prices generated in complicated real-world economies. Indeed, how many specific economic theories can claim empirical success at the level exhibited in his figure, which shows monetary neutrality? The kind of non-monetary neutrality shown in this figure needs to be a central feature of any monetary or macroeconomic theory that claims seriousness. Now, Robert Lucas was really good at monetary economics, but he wasn't good at monetary matters because he signed a contract with his wife that if he got the Nobel Prize, she would get half of it. He got the Nobel Prize just before that clause expired. So if you're interested in the details, read that article. He literally got the Nobel Prize just a few weeks before the divorce contract, which stipulated that he would get half of any Nobel Prize winnings, expired. So everyone can be surprised. That's the lesson of that article. So prices appear sticky. That's the first empirical message. I'm going to try to go inductively at this. I'm going to look at the data and say, it looks like the surface of a lake. Things look pretty steady. They're not moving very much. Now, individually, we know lots of people are moving prices, possibly a lot, possibly a little. Why is the level of the lake so steady? Right? It's a little bit like it's a nice metaphor. Prices appear sticky, even though firms are setting prices. So we'll do some microeconomics to think about that. We know for a fact that individual firms change their prices infrequently. Okay, so Bills and Clino, in about 20 years ago, did this study. It's been replicated many times. The average time between price changes, okay, so think of your favorite club. When you go to your club, have a Coke or a beer or something stronger, how often do they change their prices? They don't change them every day. Okay, that's a fact. And the fact differs from different sectors to sector. So if you talk about gasoline prices, they change every day. They change maybe every 2 hours. But my barber, that club you go to, the price of the car you may be buying or leasing, less frequently. 13 months in the euro area. This is a very, very broad study. So that's a fact. Why do firms do that? Is that optimal behavior? That's the big question. What kind of behavior is that? Well, changing prices has costs and benefits, right? That's the thing you should remember. Nominal price, even though everyone knows Hume, most of you have common sense. You know that if the European Central Bank triples the money supply in the next few weeks, it's going to have a long-term effect on the price level of goods in the European Monetary Union, right? And we can talk about how long it would take for this to happen. But the frequency of price changes is a fact. In low inflation environments, it's rather infrequent. So there must be some reason that firms are doing this. And it varies. Like I said, gas stations versus barbers, we can see it in the data. So this is European. This is a single Italian gas station and a single French gas station. How often do they change their prices? Now you can see there's a lot of motion in there. because they're pricing to market. These are barbers or hairdressers in the same two countries. Okay, so maybe a whole year nothing happens and they change the price. Now, that's interesting. What makes a hairdresser different from a gas station? I'm sure you're a clever economist, you're masters, you understand there are lots of good arguments. The gas station has to buy its gasoline every day at spot prices that are changing like the price of oil, price of refined petroleum products. They got to pass on those price changes. Otherwise, they're going to go out of business. But if you're a barber, what are your costs doing? Are you buying lots of gasoline for your input? No. You're probably buying some electricity, but mostly you're buying a rental unit so you can cut the hair, and you got some equipment you paid for, maybe with a bank loan. So your costs are different. And you care about making a profit. You also care about your customers. If you keep raising your price every day, they're not going to like you very much. They're going to think you're trying to screw them. That's human nature. So different customer relationships might matter. It's the same at your grocery store. I know you go out and buy in Berlin at the, maybe you just go to the Späti, but you probably also go to Real and you look at the prices. I do that. I go to that Rewe over there, product placement. So I go to Rewe and I look at the cottage cheese. Cottage cheese used to always cost 69 cents. And just a few weeks ago, actually a few months ago, I noticed it went up to 79 cents. And I noticed it. And now it's 99 cents. Now that's not a hyperinflation, but on that product, that's quite a bit of change. It's a lot, right? So think about it. Right? The average price level is an average of millions of prices. They all have to kind of go in the same direction. So this is evidence from a United States store for a particular product. These are crackers, sort of Knäckebrot, maybe in German. It's not quite the same thing. If you've been to the United States, you know what Triscuit is. It's for people who are on a diet. Lots of fiber for their digestion and not much else, okay? Look at the price of those things. They don't look sticky, but maybe they are. What do you see going on there? This is taken from a pretty interesting paper, by the way. Yeah. Right, it goes down and it goes right back to where it was before. So it's kind of like people are playing around with their customers to see what the elasticity of their demand is, right? And a lot of people like me wait for Rewe to cut their prices, and then I go over there and buy whatever it is, just because it's kind of it's sport. Yeah, it's like fun. But if you're a family, you probably can't do that too much. But certainly, when those prices go down, some people who have a high marginal utility of crackers, which is still maybe is exceeded by the marginal utility of money for them, they wait till they get that special deal and they go for it. Because why would firms do that? Looks like they're trying to figure out what the demand curve looks like. So there is a demand curve. Firms set prices. They care about it. They're not taking prices. This is not price-taking behavior. So there's a lot of evidence on this. The real data show this is not just Germany, not just the United States. It's everywhere. And it depends on the sector. So unprocessed food, prices move more frequently than processed food, move more frequently than services. And energy and products like that, they move a lot. So you can understand there are different markets, different market processes. It's really difficult to get this all under one roof. Yet, the aggregate behavior of price level is rather flat. This is the price level in the Burns-Mitchell diagram. Okay, now remember, inflation is the rate of change of the price level. But you can see that there's no, at least unless you have a microscope, you don't see much of a change of price, the raw nominal price. So it's dominated by inflation probably, by the overall level of rate of change of prices. So that's causing this tanker to move upward, okay? And it's a lot of averaging, but it's averaged around the business cycle. So that the price, it's really like a tanker. It's like an oil tanker. It's going to take a lot to change the behavior of that thing. Now, if you look at consumption, you see that there is a business cycle. We showed that last time. This is personal consumption expenditures. This is the nominal wage. Wages in terms of euros or dollars or British pound sterling. It's an old picture, but it hasn't changed much. Okay? This is Germany. So I'm seeing maybe a little bit of cyclical. Again, take a microscope. If you want to look at rates of change, you get a different picture because this price level has gone up by quite a bit. Nominal prices in terms of money. Remember? Around the cycle, not much happening. This is what happens when you take the trend out. Now you see something. So prices seem to be rising, and then right before, around, they start to fall relative to trend. Remember we talked about trend last week. Okay, and this is a more modern picture. This is inflation. Now this is the change of the logs of that last variable, the rate of change. So now you see something. Inflation's on average, not always, because we know from the ASAD model it doesn't have to always go the same way, but on average, inflation is rising up until the peak of an expansion, and then it goes down. This is unequivocal evidence of pro-cyclical inflation, but inflation does not have to be pro-cyclical. So we need to be expansive in our view about this. So the rest of the hour will be explaining why this matters. So 2 ideas. One is that people have incomplete information. And because they have incomplete information, they work for a wage in euros that doesn't match what they think they're going to get for those euros. Okay, so a great way of thinking about this is people signed a contract, then we have this crisis with the Ukraine, the price of energy goes up, and I really feel like I'm working too hard for too little money, and I get mad about that as a worker. Right? That's a nice, easy way to explain it. And the other is that maybe the adjustment takes time to conclude. Okay, so maybe the price level is rising, but for some reason, people react in an incomplete way. So those are the 2 competing ideas that we're going to work on. You still want monetary neutrality to hold in the long run, but you want it to have effects in the short run for those reasons. People can't react, or if they want to react, they react in a very slow way. So that's kind of capturing all the threads of new Keynesian economics that you may have learned about in your other courses in your life, or maybe you heard about it. We already kind of had it in our ASAD. The slope of the aggregate supply curve is about this story. Okay? Okay, so there are a lot of ideas. I'm just gonna, and there's a whole history of this because it's called New Keynesian because Keynes thought of this, but Hume kind of thought of it. I mean, so don't give too much credit to Keynes. I mean, the idea is out there, and then all these other people, after we had these oil price increases in the 1970s, came up with these other ideas because indeed we saw inflation coming back, and we said, well, we kind of missed the boat on this. Prices are not absolutely sticky forever. They're moving, and we have to figure out a way to capture this. So people had ideas about setting the wage in advance. They thought about setting wages over several periods. So the famous Stan Fisher, president of the World Bank and central bank chairman of South Africa's central bank, John Taylor, the father of the Taylor rule, overlapping contracts. Interesting idea of getting rigidity. So every time you can set the wage or the price, you have the freedom to do so, but then you have to lock in that price for the next so-and-so periods. That's the inspiration of one of the models we'll discuss today. One of the models we will discuss today is the cost of changing prices in nominal terms. So I told you, if you go to your barber or your hairdresser and she says, or he says, you know, I'm going to charge you 40 instead of 20, and I've seen these price changes, you know, we're seeing them right now, you get mad and you say, well, I'll see you later. I'll come back in 3 years when my hair is like this. Okay, so there may be a cost of changing the price too much. So you say, look, the guy says, I'm only going to charge you 25. And it's supposed to be for everybody. So Julio Rotemberg is the father of that idea. And then the other idea we'll talk about, which is the preferred model of my colleague, Professor Reinke, is the Calvo model, which says that firms, for some exogenous reason, cannot change their prices whenever they want, and they basically have an exogenous ability to do so for other reasons that are outside the model. Both of these models lead to the same idea, which is the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, and in the long run, money is neutral. So I'd like to push today. There are lots of other things we can talk about. I was a big fan of this. I'll explain in a couple of weeks why. Price level is sticky, first common feature. And it's tricky because you don't want to have an explanation that is subject to the Lucas critique. Remember I talked about the Lucas critique? The Lucas critique says if we change policy, maybe people change the way they behave. And whatever explanation for sticky prices we want to have, we want it to be a robust explanation. It has to be grounded in some sort of optimizing behavior. Because if it's not, the Central Bank of Brazil or Argentina will try to exploit that or the Central Bank of Turkey by stimulating the economy, pumping lots of money into the system, and defeating the model. The model will not work anymore, presumably, because we do have hyperinflations. And hyperinflations are not periods of sticky prices. So if you overdo it, you will destroy the basis of this explanation. So I'm going to start with the central microeconomic features. So this is something we'll reach back. You'll feel very warm and cuddly. This is something you learned when you were an undergraduate, or maybe hopefully in advanced micro at this faculty. Because Greg Mankiw basically, in a very famous paper, put this very, very clearly. So he did what Keynes probably couldn't do, even though Keynes knew Joan Robinson, who is the mother of this idea. Monopolistic competition. Firms set prices, not I believe in flexible prices, I'm religious like a Catholic priest. No, it's about what's in the data. Firms set prices. Okay? So if firms can set prices, there are two things involved. One is, do I change my price? And the other is, by how much? So you have an extensive margin. Do I change? Do I not? Do I stay? Do I go? Or how much do I change? And both of those have possibility of increasing profits for the firm. So you go to your favorite club and you notice that the beer costs 10 euros. Wow. Huh? You know, is it gonna matter for me? I mean, why did he wait so long? Maybe he had it at 2 euros for many years and now he went to 10. Okay, think about it. That's kind of and that's why this diagram is so important. Remember this? Monopolistic competition. Firms set prices. Optimal price for the firm, if it can set the price, is what? What's the rule? And you can see it, just look at it. Say it again? Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And the idea is if I change the price, I change my marginal revenue. If I increase my price, I may increase marginal revenue because all the people who are out there buying my product are going to pay this little bit of extra money, but I'm going to lose some customers. So that's the reason why that's not an obvious charge the moon. And then marginal costs may be rising because the more I produce, the more intensively I use my capacity, and eventually my costs go through the ceiling. And that's the two curves, marginal revenue, downward sloping, and its slope is steeper, absolutely, than the demand curve. Linear, it's going to have twice the slope, absolute value, and the marginal cost curve is rising by assumption. Maybe marginal costs are falling for a monopolist, but we're talking about a monopolistic competitor. There are other things going on, and the monopolist has lots more capacity and maybe increasing returns. This guy is just a simple, he's your club, the club guy. Okay? So you can see what optimal price is, P star, optimal quantities, Q star. Where are the profits? Careful. Okay, is that right? He says it's the difference between P and MC at the optimum. It's not quite right, because marginal cost is changing, so for a low unit of units, marginal cost is low, and when you get up to the top, marginal cost is rising, so you really care about average costs. Think like a business person. Price versus average cost. So we need an average cost curve. The average cost curve is the average over all the units that are being produced. The marginal cost is just the next unit. That's what economics is all about. Alfred Marshall. I love this stuff. This is what I got into economics for when I took my first undergraduate course, you know. Now, this is all basic. This is stuff you learn when you're an undergraduate. But what happens when the price is no longer optimal? What happens if something changes my framework so P star and Q star is not the right decision anymore? And Keynes talked about what would happen if demand increased. So for this individual producer, what would happen if the demand curve shifted out like that? So the blue line is the new demand curve, and the new marginal revenue curve is MR prime. The old ones don't matter anymore. So what do I do? What should I do? If I were free to choose, I would increase my price. And where would I choose? What price would I choose? See, microeconomics is the foundation of macroeconomics nowadays. It's not just C plus I plus G. Well, the marginal cost curve has not changed by assumption, so it's still there. It could also shift, but that's not the thought experiment. It's just a demand shift. So how does the firm react? Increases the price, you said, but by how much? Just apply the old rule. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue, the new marginal revenue. The firm could also say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep the price constant. Maybe because there's some reason to deter competition. So in this case, the firm has not changed the price. The firm sells a lot more. The firm still makes a profit. Because every additional unit, like you said, price exceeds marginal cost, so I'm still making money on the extra units. I'm just not making as much money on average than I did before. So if a firm decides not to change the price, it still makes a lot of money. That's the point. So the firm does not have to increase its price every second. It can still make money. It's not making the most possible money, but maybe there's some reason not to raise the price to that level. That's the free to choose price. If you had no constraints on your behavior and you said, I'm going to maximize profits. Okay, so it's a debate between this one and this one. And if you produce more units, you actually look kind of good with your customers and say, wow, he's really working hard. Look at him go. He's cutting hair right and left, and he's not raising my prices, even though he's still making a profit on every additional haircut. So that's the new Keynesian approach in a nutshell. Do I raise or do I not raise my price? And this is in euros. So the demand curve may be shifting because of reasons that have to do with interest rate policy, aggregate demand, and I feel good. This is like Hume's customers, all these customers lining up, and they're buying stuff at the old prices, and I feel like, wow, this is a great deal for me. I'm going to work real hard, but I'm not really observing that the price level of my goods that I'm going to buy myself are also going up. Okay, so there's kind of a misperception going on there. So I put this in the slide, either you don't adjust your prices or you adjust them to the optimal level P star, which maximizes your profits. It means less output and higher prices. So that's kind of the $1 million question, the €1 million question, or the €1 million lira question. It may be costly to raise your price. I already alluded to that. So the hairdresser knows that if I raise my prices, I'm going to get a lot of nasty comments. People are going to criticize me. If I keep my price constant, I'm still making a profit, but I'm not necessarily making the maximum possible profits if I could change my price, but I'm still making a lot of money. So maybe I don't want to anger my consumers too much. This is the basis of the Rotemberg model. So Rotemberg said, if I don't raise my prices, I'm losing relative to what my maximum is, but I'm still making money. I'm still making extra profit. And that red curve, that red space, that red area, that triangle, is the difference between the marginal revenue and marginal cost at the wrong price, the wrong sticky price. Okay, so you can use calculus to figure out the exact area if you know the curves, formulas, who cares? The geometry is very clear. If I maximize profits, I would choose P star, and if I'm still choosing P bar, I'm not making a loss, I'm just making less than I would if I could really just stick it to the consumers and maximize profits. And if the cost of changing my price is bigger than this red area, I probably will hold off. That's the ultimate idea behind all these models of price setting under conditions of costly price adjustment. Yes? We'll talk about it. That's the whole model. The model is you smooth it out. The model of Rotemberg says you're going to eventually raise your price, but you're going to do it slowly and people won't notice it. Do it very, very small changes, smooth adjustment. That's one idea. It's not the only idea because, if you look at the world today, you see prices rising a lot, but it has to do a lot with the cost curve because the cost curve is also important. And if the cost curve is fed by the price of energy, that thing will shift up, and then firms may have to raise their prices also. That's a problem set question for you. Yeah, this is microeconomics, but really, really useful. So, in the strict case, if the price of going to P star costs a lot of customers or a lot of other costs involved, people used to talk about menu costs, the cost of reprinting the price list. That's what Greg Mankiw talked about in his famous paper. So if you change the price, you have to print the menu, the price list again. Nowadays, you just go in the computer and change it, but still, someone has to do it. These menu costs may lead you to slow down the price increases. Leads to sticky prices. Okay, so we'll start simple. I'm going to give you two ideas. One is by Julio Rotemberg, the late famous Julio Rotemberg from Argentina, who is going to drive today's discussion mostly. And then Guillermo Calvo, also from Argentina. It's amazing. Both these guys are from Argentina, now in the United States. And I said Calvo's model is kind of one of the preferred models of doing this today, but I think the Rotemberg model is easier, and I teach to my undergraduates, and if they can do it, you can do it. Maybe you have done it. Maybe you're in my class. I don't think so. Both of these ways are ways of getting the new Keynesian supply curve, or the new Keynesian aggregate supply curve, or some people call it the new Keynesian Phillips curve. They're all kind of interchanged. But Phillips curve, for me, is about unemployment. We're talking about output, getting an upward sloping curve. So Rotemberg said, firms control the prices, like we said. Firms set prices. This is already a deviation from the classical model. But they don't want to change them too quickly. They want to slow it down, right? They don't want to antagonize their consumers. They want to make themselves look popular. And this is like investing in their future consumer base. A lot of people think of it like that. I'm investing in my consumer relationship. And people like Phelps and others made these arguments a long, long time ago. I'm going to follow a very simple algebraic treatment. I'm not going to have any optimization in your face today. We'll do that next time. So this is about just tracking an average. Tracking an average and showing how this matters in the way the firms reset their prices. Okay? So think about a cost of changing the price, and I'm going to say log of price, because log of price, change of log is like percentage change. So this is like the cost of making a big percentage increase or decrease is costly. I lose customers, I lose whatever, profit. And we'll also say that the demand curve has a shock. And we'll make it all log linear to make it really easy for us. Okay? So P bar is what the other guys are doing, because I'm in a world where other people are looking at me, and I'm P. I'm setting my price P. Again, this can be made very complicated, and other courses you can take here make it complicated, but if you like this stuff, do it. It's really interesting, and it's also a very active area of research. So more elaborate models, you could think of a whole bunch of different products, and you have a utility function, and we'll talk about that next week. And basically, your P and the players in your market are P prime, and they all have the same structure. So the nice thing about this is in equilibrium, everyone's going to be doing the same thing. But you're perceiving, I have to do better, or relative to the other guys, because if I raise my price, I may lose some of the demand to them. This is a really simple model, and this has been around for about 25 years. It's a really nice way to teach students, and if you like this stuff, you go on to do the heavy lifting. Okay, so if you want to be a weightlifter, you don't start with 200 kilograms. You have to build up, So this is how we do it. So simple idea. Your P, the rest of the world is P prime, and it's comparison that matters, and you're going to do the right thing, and it's log linear. Okay? So the firm basically, remember we had this P star, where the firm would like to be. If they didn't have any costs, they would go to P star. And P star is basically a function of the other guys. So if I reduce my P star relative, if P prime is high, I want to set my P star high. Because the other guys are doing it, I can get away with it too, because that determines the level of my demand. Makes sense, right? Beta is just it has nothing to do with the discount factor, it's just a sensitivity parameter to aggregate demand. So B is the percentage response of my optimal price to a 1% change in aggregate demand in the economy, Y. And then you have this shock, epsilon, which is a cost shock. Think of oil prices, gas prices, other types of exogenous price. So this is kind of this is the P star we had in our diagram. It's a reduced form. So this is again, a simplification. So you're setting your P, and P star, if you could get away with it, you would go for P star. That's the best you can do. And it's a function of what your neighbors are doing. It's a function of aggregate demand. And it's a function of the costs. Okay, so I put this down here so you can remind you. And think of Y as being exogenous. You can't, if the economy picks up and everyone starts buying your stuff, then even no matter what price you're charging, you're going to get more demand. That's what this curve is trying to express, this demand curve. And think of beta as an elasticity. I apologize for beta is like one of these it's like a popular person in high school. Everybody wants to talk to them. Everybody wants to use beta. But if you read the paper, he uses beta too. Maybe someday I'll change it. And think of this epsilon as a supply shock. So you can actually put the gas crisis, the European gas crisis, in this framework. It makes a lot of sense. It's a shift of all prices given, and this is why inflation went up so quickly, I think. Everyone's using energy, price of energy goes up, the optimal price goes up, and firms that are setting their prices will raise their price. We're going to focus mostly on the demand side because that's the most important part of this idea. And the most important part of this idea is the fact that changing the price is painful. in terms of your bottom line. And we're going to say that the costs of changing prices are convex. That means that the marginal cost of a price increase is increasing. So the bigger the change, the more, proportionally speaking, the costs are to you. So my hairdresser raises his price from 20 to 30, I'm not going to go back. I'm going to be really mad at him, and he's going to feel it. I'll spread the news that he's exploiting me or something. That's the idea. Okay? Now, intuition is simple. Small steps, easier to swallow than big ones. If he keeps raising it by, say, 5 or 1 euro every time I see him, I may not notice it as much as if he goes for 10 or 15 euros once, bam. Okay, that's the notion. That's what you have to remember. And I'm going to show this formally now using a model. I'm going to use the same model that Roberts uses in his 1995 paper, which was built on Rotemberg 1982. And I learned when I was in graduate school in 90, don't want to say, 85, okay? And people are still teaching it. It's still being used in research today. So think of a firm, and the firm is cost minimizing. It's minimizing the expected value of present and future costs given that it has this adjustment cost. So it doesn't just choose P star every day because it can't maximize profits that way. Every time it changes its price, it's going to lose something. So it's about the path of getting there. So the firm sets a path. The firm sets a price path to maximize expected discounted profits. So this is a big step. Keynes never did this. In fact, all the Keynesians after him never did this. This is a modern approach to thinking about why. Because if you raise your price today, you don't have to raise it as much tomorrow. And in fact, if you have a reason to believe that the price that you want to set is the same for many, many periods, but it's higher than you are now, then you want to build up slowly to that. Because if you go all the way, you lose customers, you lose profits, you increase your costs. So we'll set this up as a cost minimization for you. In the advanced course, it's a profit maximization problem. It turns out they're very, very similar. But again, I'm trying to teach you the intuition. That's my job. Okay, this is a shortcut. If you take Professor Reinke's course, he'll go right to the quick profit maximization. Next week, I'll show you the profit maximization problem. It's not that much more complicated, but it's easier to understand this, in my opinion. Okay, so here it is. The firm minimizes its discounted expected costs, and that's what it looks like. The first part is the cost of being away from your optimal price. Obviously, you're losing money if you're not at P star, and you're also losing money if you change your price a lot. And the quadratic is just a way of making it convex. So you're minimizing this sum of two convex functions. Okay, so this is a generalization of a lot of, or this is an approximation to a lot of interesting problems that have the feature of convexity, of being away from P star, and the convexity of changing too fast. So you see, I've got the ingredients. I've got the change. Remember? The change in the log is like the percentage change for small changes. So PT minus 1 is my own personal rate of price increase. Right? And being away from P star is also costly because I'm not making that red triangle go to 0. If I were maximizing profit, I would make the red triangle go to 0. So it's kind of a contest between those two. So if I substitute my formula for P star, I told you what that was, then I've got a very well-defined problem in P. How do I set the path of prices from today until kingdom come, given the demand I'm expecting from my competitors, given by P prime, and given by aggregate demand? So you can see already All these things are cooked in there. All the things that I care about. So how do we minimize this? This is a minimization problem. How do I minimize that thing? It's unconstrained. There are no Lagrangian multipliers involved. This is a simple minimization problem. So I just take the derivative of the objective function with respect to every price in expectation from now until eternity and set that equal to 0. And I can do that. We did that the previous week. It's really simple for you, simple optimization problem. The differentiation operator, to make this as big as possible, is a linear operator, so I can pass it through the expectations operator. That's also kind of useful. So the derivatives I can set equal to 0, passing it through the expectation. So even though I expect something, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years or 10 quarters or 10 months, I can still say that in expectation, a small change in my planned price will lead to no change in my expected profits today. That's the lovely intuition of maximization or minimization here. Okay, minimization I'm talking about. Okay, so the first order conditions look like that. If I'm doing the right thing, if I'm minimizing my costs today, my price plan, it's not just a single price, it's a path of prices, is going to have 3 components. One is I'm going to reduce my cost by getting closer to P star. At the same time, if I change my price, I'm going to have some costs of adjustment, so I got to pay that. But if I change today, I don't have to change tomorrow. Ceteris paribus, I've already moved the price. So next period, it's already moved. I have less adjustment if I want to make adjustment tomorrow. So adding those 3 together, if I'm minimizing my costs, those have to add up to 0. That means I'm on top of the hill. I'm doing the best I can, or here, the bottom of the valley. I'm minimizing. The first derivative of that objective function is equal to 0 no matter where I go. That means I'm doing the best I can. So that's the magic equation. Look at that carefully. Because of the quadratic setup, it's linear. The first order conditions are linear in the decision variable. So it has a lovely intuition. I'm going to, I've written it down, but it's also all about C. C is the cost parameter. How costly is it to make that price adjustment? How fast do my marginal costs of a price adjustment rise? If C is really high, then I'm going to take it really slowly. If C is very low, can't be 0, it can be very close to 0, then I'm going to raise the prices. Who cares? No cost of going too fast or slow. Okay? Well, the cool thing is I can actually solve that. I can solve it for PT. I can solve for my optimal price today. And that's why we do the quadratic approximation, because then we can solve for it. Otherwise, we have to ask the computer to do it, and we're already asking the computer to do everything. ChatGPT 3.0. I mean, aren't you guys worried about that? I have a colleague who actually gave a problem in an academic paper to solve, and ChatGPT can solve it. I'm not going to be doing much research anymore. So pay attention. We want to beat the computer at least at something. Rotemberg showed us that first order condition, and all I'm going to do now is impose an equilibrium condition on that, and I'm going to solve for it, and then I get the inflation rate. That's the trick, right? I need to say we're all the same, even though we think we're different, and we end up doing this policy. My P is equal to your P prime, your P is equal to me, and then we have an equilibrium. That's the secret of this model. Again, it's so simple, that's why I do it right now. Yeah?
What did RT stand for?
It's a discount factor.
Beta.
Yeah, instead of beta. That's the conflict of my life is beta or R, 1 plus R. I mean, it's, again, you show you're a master when you can actually transcend the Greek. You can speak Hebrew, Greek, Chinese, whatever. You understand the concept. You don't need the letters. But that takes quite a bit of practice. And I'm trying to help you, but economics is hopeless. Too many concepts, too few symbols. So if everyone does the same thing, if P equals P prime, then the inflation rate must be the rate of change of P. right? It must be. Because, and I say first difference is because this is in logarithms. The whole thing is couched in logarithmic terms. So change in log of the price level is the inflation rate. So this is an instant theory of inflation. We have a theory of the aggregate supply curve, and it's going to be upward sloping. It's going to be upward sloping, which is wonderful. This is the new Keynesian AS curve, sometimes called the Phillips curve. So if I solve that, it's going to look like that. The inflation rate, and you can do it yourself, we'll do it in section. Inflation today is sum of three things. First, from the right to left. The right is the supply shock. So the supply shock is important. If the supply shock is zero, no inflation coming from the supply shock. But if we have oil prices going up by 100% or gas prices by 500%, that will have an immediate impact on the inflation rate. And if gas prices come down again, that will pull the inflation down. That's the first effect, going from right to left, Arabic or Chinese style. Okay, so going from the right to the left. Second one is aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is a deviation from the trend. When aggregate demand is high, everyone wants to set higher prices. That's going to mean higher price level and higher inflation rate. But only changes will affect the inflation rate, right? Deviations. Deviations will affect the inflation rate. And then you have PT. The most important one is the first term. That's the expectation of future inflation. That's the most important part of this model. Today's inflation depends on people's expectations of the future. If I know my optimal price is rising at a higher rate over the near periods, I want to start thinking about that now to reduce my total costs. So I front load the price change. I anticipate forward-looking inflation. Right? So my barber says, wow, things look really bad. I think we're going to have high prices for a long time. I'm going to be charging 40 euros for a long time, so I'm going to start now. I'm going to start, even though I don't think it's happening immediately, but I know it's going to come in a year, I'm going to start raising my prices now. Front loading. Now Calvo, I'll have to talk about more, I've been a bit dramatic just for fun, but Calvo is just as important, a different idea, two competing ideas. And they came out at the same time. It's pretty amazing, right? Calvo has a slightly different, and if you want to go read the paper, it's a difficult paper to read. This is Robert's translation of Calvo. The idea is the same. The mathematics are slightly different. Calvo's idea was that firms cannot change their price. They would like to, anytime, but they can't. For some reason, they're constrained. So they have a contract, and the contract binds them to charge the price they're charging until they're free to change. Now, what determines that? In the Calvo model, it's random. So your ability to change the price is not under your control. It's controlled by exogenous factors. Calvo, we call it the Calvo fairy. Die Calvo Fee. So, like Peter Pan, so you get a tap on your head, and then you're allowed to change the price. It's a random event. So Calvo thought this is a cool way to model this very complex situation. So the idea is that basically people have a P star, but maybe they're distracted. Maybe they're too busy working on their marketing or too busy trying to reconstruct their firm or hire some new workers. They just get distracted. And then randomly they have, oh yeah, I should raise my price. And then they change it. They know they should be charging a higher price or a lower price, but they just don't do it because they're too busy. So again, you might say, well, what about the Lucas critique? Right? It doesn't sound like something that is immune to policy interventions or maybe high inflation. Well, Calvo did this. We're still using it. It works for low inflation environments. Just sit back and enjoy this Calvo fairy visit because it's the competitor to Rotemberg. So the idea is there's a probability that the fairy will visit you and say you can change your probability, you can change your price, and you can go for P star. And it's completely exogenous. You can't influence it, you can't optimize it, it just happens. Right? It's luck. Okay, so it's an interesting idea. We should take it seriously. So the probability that you cannot change your price is phi. So I'm an American, so phi, phi, fo, fum. The Europeans would say phi. But if I say phi, then people who watch this will never know what I'm talking about. So I will use the phi. That's phi. 1 minus phi is the probability that you're allowed to change in a particular period. But again, this goes on for time, so maybe if you're lucky, you get to change it many times in a row. Maybe not. Maybe you get stuck. So this is a probability density. This is a probability of something happening over time. And this phi is really important. This phi is a measure of rigidity. It's the probability I can't change my price. Okay, this is really, this is an amazing, and I think Calvo might get the Nobel Prize for this. Seriously, so write it down, come back to me in 5 years. Because it's a cool idea. It's also relevant for labor economics, other types of economic processes. When an arrival is basically a function of how much time you have to wait, it's called Poisson process. Okay, a continuous time would be a Poisson process. This is a discrete time. Okay, so why does this work? Well, is it a density? Yes, because the probability that you have to wait exactly n periods is simply the probability that nothing happened until then, and then the probability that it happens. Okay, so the probability that nothing happened is in n periods, or you had to wait n periods would be phi to the nth power, and then the probability that given that you waited that long that you can change is 1 minus phi times that. That's a probability density because the support of the distribution is waiting 1 period or waiting infinite number of periods. And the measure of that is very small, but over time, the longer you have to wait, the less likely it will be that you have to wait that long. Okay? This is very useful, by the way, for a lot of other things in economics and business. Is this a probability distribution? Yes. All the probabilities are non-negative, and they sum to 1. And you can prove it very trivially. You just write it down. 1 minus phi is a probability you get to change exactly in 1 period. You multiply that by 1. Probability you get to change in 2 periods is 1 minus phi times 2. Okay, and then you can just take, you integrate that density to get an expected value, or you can just take the sum of those probabilities, and they should be equal to 1. Are they? Yes. And that concept I just mentioned is the mean. The average waiting time would be the density of 1 period times 1, density of waiting exactly 2 periods times 2, probability plus the probability of waiting exactly 3 periods times 3, and then just add those boogers up. It's also very simple. It's 1 over 1 minus phi. And the proof is really quite elegant. It involves a little bit of calculus. If you're interested, just work it through. It's kind of cool, right? That sum. It's also like in labor economics, how long do I have to wait before I get a job? It's called the expected duration of completed unemployment. It can be derived using the same formula. Okay, this is a beautiful formula. So if phi is the probability of rigidity in a period, 1 over 1 minus phi is the length of time between price changes. So this is my measure of the new Keynesian rigidity. The lower that probability of changing is, the more sticky prices are, and the more effective monetary policy will be. There it is. Okay, so let's put that in the Calvo model. This is the baby version. Some of my colleagues would laugh at this and say, "Why are you teaching these guys?" Well, this is the easy one to understand. And then when you grow up, then it's like learning how to drive a car. You know, I learned how to drive a car in Shreveport, Louisiana, on a parking lot. In Germany, you go to Fahrschule. So just different ways. I think on a parking lot, it's kind of easier because there's no risk. It's a Sunday, nobody's there. Anyway, okay. So in the Calvo model, you're stuck unless you're allowed to change. Unless the fairy comes and says, boop, you can change your price, you're stuck. You have to choose P, right? So that's not so good, and you have a cost of that. And this Calvo parameter summarizes the nominal rigidity that you're facing. And again, if you would take an example, if Calvo, the phi is equal to 0.8, then 1 over 1 minus phi is equal to 5 in a quarterly model. Prices are sticky for 5 quarters on average. Now, some guys are lucky. Maybe the Calvo fairy comes right away to you and says, boop, you can change your price again, even though you just changed it last time. But that's a rare event compared to waiting for 5 periods, at least, okay? So it's a distribution, and this type of distribution can be aggregated, and that's why economists like it, because you get closed form solutions. So you don't have to use a computer yet. So you can see that if phi is equal to 0.9, you're going to have to wait a long time on average before you can change your price again. So when you change your price, you better do a good job and look forward, because if you don't, you could be stuck at a bad price for a long time. My hairdresser 10 years ago charged me 10 euros, and if he's still charging me 10 euros, he's probably not doing very well. He's probably out of business because his wages have gone up, his employees' wages have gone up, his electricity costs have gone up, and a lot of other stuff. So how does the Calvo model work in the Baby Roberts version? If a firm can change its price, it chooses its price to be an average of future optimal prices. So that's I'm going to assert that. You can prove it. Roberts just writes it down. I just want to show you what it leads to, okay? So it means if I get to change my price today, I'm going to choose P star today, P star tomorrow, P star in the future, some average of those, because I can, otherwise I'm stuck. So I'm always going to be forward-looking. I'm looking to the future. I'm front-loading. That's really important. Okay? So this is really cool, simple algebra. I just manipulate that formula. I know what P star is, and I can rewrite it as a moving average. That's the last expression of P star and the expected price in T plus 1. And the weights are exactly 1 minus phi and phi. This is gives rise to a recursion. Otherwise, I'm stuck. By assumption, I'm stuck. If I can change it, I change it. I go for that. But if I don't, I'm stuck at the old P. Okay, so I'm using that. P star is the price I would choose in the absence of rigidity. So I'm going to have to look forward and say, what's demand going to be in the future? I better anticipate. Is there going to be another shock, an oil shock? Maybe oil shocks can be anticipated. Maybe I see Russia coming. I better start changing my prices now because I'm going to, right? Because I may not have a chance to change them. If the Calvo fairy blesses me and I can change my price, I better do the right thing. Otherwise, I may be stuck, frozen in a contract in the future. It's all about, he calls it contracts. So think of this as a contract. I commit to charging P, and then I'm stuck until my counterparty releases me from the contract. Okay, but it's a random event. I can't anticipate it. I can't manipulate it. I have no ability to do that. The cool thing about this model is once you've made that assumption, you can actually derive the aggregate price level, just like with the Rotemberg model. So I can manipulate to get a PT given PT equals P prime T. So I get an inflation rate, just like before. This involves a little bit of algebra, okay? But it's quite amazing. So the price level of my competitors is also an average of the price that is being set currently plus the lagged level of the competitor's price level or the price level of the entire economy. And therefore, you can derive the inflation rate. And I have a slide where I show you how to do that. It's like the appendix, if you're interested in doing it. You end up getting something that looks just like the Rotemberg model. It looks just like it. There's a slight difference. Maybe you can find it. But the inflation rate in the Calvo model is equal to the expected value of the future inflation rate, because I'm front loading, and the current level of demand in the economy, except it doesn't have the beta anymore divided by C. It has 1 minus phi squared divided by phi. So it's a ratio of those two measures of rigidity and non-rigidity. I'll come back to that in a second. And then you have the final term is the supply shock, just like before. So we have those three components in there as well. We have forward-looking, front-loading, and we have aggregate demand today, and we have the supply shock. So we have the same ingredients of the new Keynesian supply curve a la Calvo instead of Rotemberg. So we have two different ways of getting a very similar result. You see, and I'll talk about this later, the slope of the supply curve depends on the rigidity of prices. Remember, we said that phi is a measure of the probability is the probability that I cannot change my price. So when phi is very close to 1, the aggregate supply curve is flat. Prices are rigid. And that would say, okay, even though we had this big pandemic, post-pandemic boom, the inflation rate didn't go off to infinity because people were rigid in their pricing behavior. Okay, so this is a very powerful idea, and we'll talk about it in section. This is called the Calvo version. We did the Rotemberg, now we have the Calvo New Keynesian AS curve. And here's the derivation if you're interested. If you like algebra, you can play with it. That's how we get it, okay? It's simply about, you know that agents tomorrow are behaving like agents today, so you can substitute, and then you can take expectations and you get the answer. Okay, this is called the new Keynesian AS curve in Calvo, the Calvo derivation. So these are the two leading dudes, and unfortunately Julio left us, so if Calvo gets the Nobel Prize, he shouldn't get all of it, he should get half of it, because Rotemberg is also important. Okay, so I'm about done, but I have some remarks to inspire you to think about this some more. The new Keynesian Phillips curve, or AS curve, can be derived either way, and it can be written like this. So it's basically inflation today is a function of expected inflation tomorrow. That's a really important idea. Forward-looking inflation. So it's better than what we did before in our AS curve. This is better. People are forward-looking. They're trying to anticipate what the government's doing, what the central bank's doing, what the economy's doing. And then you've got sensitivity to aggregate demand. Why? And kappa is the ratio of either the rigidity parameter to the non-rigidity complement, or it's a function of the Calvo cost of adjusting prices. Okay? So we have three aspects of the Phillips curve, or the aggregate supply curve. We have expectations, output gap, and supply shock. Output gap is a measure of the demand or deviations of the economy from the steady state. Most important is the forward-looking behavior. I said that many times. Firms plan ahead. They plan ahead because they know it's costly to change prices, or they plan ahead because they know they can't always change the price when they want to. Okay? The expiry of the contract is stochastic, and they know that, and therefore they have to do a bit of front-loading to get ahead of the game. Okay, so there's two different ideas, same feature, and there are a lot of criticisms of both. We'll talk about them next week maybe, but in general, these are really, really important ideas. This is the way these guys kind of saved Keynesian economics from the dust bin. Because you need some way, under the modern critique of rational expectations and price-setting behavior by microeconomic agents like firms that want to maximize their profits, how do you get that, how do you square that circle? This is what they've done. Next week we'll do some more detail on this, but you can see the key thing to get that solution that I had before for Calvo involves this recursive substitution. You take the forward-looking version of the same period's, the current period's behavior, substitute it, take expectations, and do that a lot of times. That's kind of the key thing, right? So you end up getting, the inflation today is a function of basically future deviations of aggregate demand from its trend, and we know that in the long run monetary neutrality holds, so that cannot be positive. That expressed must be a function of the demand feedback coming from the central bank behavior, and therefore the model's not closed yet. It's just the demand, it's just the supply curve we've derived. We haven't done the demand curve, so we're not done. This is not a complete theory of inflation. To complete the theory, you need to ask who's setting the growth rate of nominal demand in the economy, who's setting the growth rate of nominal money, or who is setting the inflation target. And in the long run, the inflation target is the inflation rate. But this shows you how we deviate. Okay? So, we made it. I hope I inspired you to think more about this topic. And there are lots of things to think about. Please go to section. Leopold apparently is better. Thank goodness. And wear a mask if you go see him. Okay. All right, have a nice week. See you.